Hello and welcome to another project walkthrough. As you may know, my name is Vic Parachuri, and today I am going to be taking you through a data project. So we have an exciting one on tap today. This is a project where we're going to walk through a data visualization project from end to end, and we're going to be looking at Bitcoin prices, and specifically the price history in the past few years. And by the end of this project, we should be able to make a chart that looks like this one, where we can see Bitcoin prices peaking in 2021, and we can really clearly highlight that. But to start, we're going to need to download the prices, then we're going to need to do a little bit of data cleaning and reshaping, and then we can get into the visualization part. So without further ado, let's get started. So as you may have seen, I'm using Jupyter Lab for the purposes of this demo. Jupyter Lab is basically an enhancement on Jupyter Notebooks. So if you know Jupyter Notebooks, this should be really similar. I'm assuming you have Python 3 installed. I'm using Python 3.9, and I'm also assuming that you have Jupyter installed as well. So I'm not going to walk through installing that. But the first package we're going to be using is called 4x Python. And if you need to install it, you can just install it like this. I already have it installed, but I will go ahead and run this. And you can see there's some output. In my case, it's already installed, so it didn't go through as much output as it would have if you're installing it fresh. So let's get rid of this. And now we can actually work through importing it. So we're going to import this 4x Python library, and we're specifically going to import the Bitcoin module in this library. And from this, we're going to import something called the BTC converter class. And this is what's going to let us query our Bitcoin price history. And actually on the back end, it's just querying using the Coinbase API. So if you have another way to access the Coinbase API, you are welcome to use that as well. So we initialize our class, and this is what's going to be able to download the prices for us. So I'll go ahead and run that. Now what we need to do is we need to define the start and end dates, the date we want to start getting prices from and the date we want to end. And to do that, we can use the Python datetime library. Weirdly, datetime also has a module called datetime inside of it, so this commonly trips me up when I just type datetime once and it turns out I need to type it twice. And what datetime lets you do is create datetime objects. So you may commonly see dates like this. That's January 1st, 2021. But Python doesn't interpret this as a datetime yet. This interprets this as a string. So in order to create a Python date object, we need to actually use this datetime library. So if I make a date like this, that's actually January 1st, 2015. It's a Python date object, not a string. So Python can interpret it properly as a date. So this start date is the date we are going to start getting our prices on. And then I'm also going to make an end date, the date we want to get our prices up until. And let's make that the 27th of December, 2021. So we want to get Bitcoin to USD prices between that start date and that end date. So we'll be getting about 6 years of price history. Actually, almost 7 years. And then what we can do is go ahead and download it. So we'll do price data, which is the variable we want to assign it to, is B. B is this BTC converter class we initialized earlier. It has this method called get previous price list. Previous price list. It's always harder to type when you know people are watching. So we'll go from USD to Bitcoin. So this will give us Bitcoin prices in terms of US dollars. And then we'll plug in our start and our end date. So what this will do is this will give us all of the Bitcoin prices on each day from the start date until the end date. So let me go ahead and run that. I did not run this, so star is not defined. Now it is. This will just take a second to go ahead and download. Once it downloads, I want to make sure I can understand what price data looks like. So I can look at the length. I can also look at the type. So we can see that price data is a dictionary with about 2,500 keys and values assigned to it. So to make this easier to work with, we're going to go ahead and convert it to a pandas data frame. And to convert it, we need to first import pandas. If you don't have pandas installed, you can do the same thing I did earlier when I typed pip install. You can just type pip install pandas. If you use this exclamation mark in Jupyter Notebook, it actually runs the command in the command line terminal. And in this case, you can go ahead and install any packages you want that way. So I'm going to import pandas, and then I'm actually going to convert this dictionary to a data frame. Actually, I'll import it as PD. So it's very common for folks to say import pandas as PD. This is just so you avoid typing pandas over and over, and you can just type PD instead. So I'll say data frame. This is the primary way that you interact with data in pandas, through something called a data frame. And a data frame is a nice wrapper around a table or a matrix. And in this case, we're going to convert our dictionary to a data frame to make it easier to work with. And the way we do that is pandas expects things to be in array form, and typing .items, actually let me just show you what .items does. Turn into a list first. It actually turns each key value pair into this tuple. So you'll first get the date, and then you'll get the actual price, which is a format pandas can work with. Again, pandas, you work with matrices, and columns of data, and converting our dictionary into this format enables pandas to actually convert it to a data frame effectively. And then we just specify the names of the columns. So we have one column, which is date, and one column, which is price. So let's go ahead and run that. And then we can take a look at the first couple of rows of prices. So you can see we have two columns. So we have dates, and then we have prices. So now we essentially have a pandas data frame where each row is corresponding to a given date, and on that date we have the price. Now pandas has a concept of an index, and an index is actually how you select certain rows from a data frame. So what we want to do is convert this date column to an index column to make the data frame easier to work with. So the way we do that is we just use the setIndex method, and we say, hey, set the date column as the index. And let's take a look again and see what happened. So you notice this 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the left is gone, and it's now the dates. That's because the index used to be these numbers, and now it's actually the dates. And this will just make it easier for us to select rows and make it easier for us to work with the data. And let me show you what I mean. So if we use this LOC command, we can select rows by index. So what I can do now is if I just want to select all the data for 2017, I can go ahead and do that, and that'll give me all of the rows. Remember, there's a caveat here. Unlike list indexing, pandas indexing is up to and including the last value. So in reality, if I actually wanted to just select 2017, I would do that, and it would go ahead and just, those are all the rows for 2017 only. And you'll see how setting the index to the date column just makes this easier to work with. Before, I would have had to figure out, okay, which index actually corresponds to January 1st, 2017, and then I would have had to index that way. Now I can just plug in the value directly. Way easier to work with. Let me just pause and take a breath here. We did a lot. So we've downloaded our data. We've converted it from a dictionary into a pandas data frame. And now we have an easy to work with data frame of Bitcoin prices from January 1st, 2015 through December 27th, 2021. All right, we did a lot. Now the fun part can start. Data visualization. So I mentioned by the end, we would be able to generate a chart like this that shows how Bitcoin prices peaked. So I don't want to let you down here, so let's go ahead and start doing that. So prices is our data frame, as we saw from before. Pandas has this really handy plot method that plots the data in a data frame. So let's go ahead and plot this. So you see we already have a plot that shows the dates on the x-axis and the Bitcoin prices on the y-axis, which is awesome. We already have come really far, and Pandas has a lot of built-in stuff that just makes it really easy to work with data. But this chart isn't the greatest. And there's a few issues we're going to fix in this chart as we go through and try to create a nicer looking chart. So the first thing we're going to do is you see all these little jagged things here. This is because it's using daily prices, and those daily prices go up and down, up and down, up and down. So what we're going to do is create a rolling mean. And that'll just smooth these lines out and make it a little bit easier to visualize. So pandas, again, is just awesome when it comes to doing that. So this rolling function enables you to create rolling averages really easily. So that's all the work we need to do to make a 30-day rolling average. And you see, we now get back a data frame with dates and prices. Now, there are going to be no prices for the first 30 days because you can't have a rolling average until you actually get 30 days of data to average. And we can go ahead and plot this and see what it looks like. All right, so that's a lot better. We've basically removed all of those little jagged lines, and we now have smooth lines that are a lot easier to look at. So that's step one in making our plots look nicer. Step two is let's go ahead and actually improve the style of this plot. And matplotlib, which is the underlying library that Pandas uses to create visualizations, actually has some nice built-in styles already. So we'll leverage one of those. And oh, I forgot to mention, if on this step, when you did prices.plot, you got an error, you may have to do pip install matplotlib. So just in case you need to do that, because Pandas doesn't have all of the plotting functions and methods inside of the pandas library. It instead uses matplotlib to do a lot of that work. All right, so to restyle a matplotlib plot, we can just use this style method. And what we're going to use is the 538 style. And if you're not familiar with 538, it's a site where there is a lot of analysis and visualization of US politics, sports, etc. And they have a really distinctive chart style. So we're going to use their style. And let's just go ahead and create this plot again. And to do that, I'll just go ahead and copy this code. So we're not typing it over and over. I'll assign it to rolling. And then what we'll do is rolling.plot. And there you go. We automatically got a much nicer looking plot without really doing much. We just imported a style method and we used the 538 style. So, okay, we now have a much nicer looking plot, but there's still some issues. You can see the date labels are really closely bunched together. There's this axis label date. This legend is here, and there's just a few things we could fix. So let's fix those. But before we fix them, let's figure out the story we want to tell with this visualization. And the whole reason for making visualizations is to tell stories. And we want to make sure our visualization tells that story compellingly. So when I just look at this graph, there's a few stories you could tell. You could tell the story of how the Bitcoin price increased here, this small peak and decrease you see. You could tell the story of how Bitcoin surged in 2021, or you could tell the story of this 2015 to 2019 kind of gradual rise and plateau. Now, the story I'm going to choose to tell with this visualization is Bitcoin really peaked in 2021. You can see this surge. So that's what we're really going to focus on. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and actually add a title that indicates that says, hey, Bitcoin surged in 2021. And then in subsequent iterations of our plot, we can clean up some of the issues I mentioned earlier. So far, we've been relying on pandas to do most of the work for us. We've just typed .plot, and pandas has done the rest of the work in plotting everything. We're actually going to take a little bit more manual control so that we can actually clean up these styles a little bit more. When you go through pandas, you have to use a lot of defaults and assumptions pandas has made. And if we want to customize the plot a little bit, we have to take a little more control. And to do that, we have to call some of the matplotlib methods ourselves instead of letting pandas do it. So the first thing we'll do is we'll again do rolling.plot, but we'll assign it to a variable. And then we can modify that variable before we use matplotlib to show the plot. So what we can do is we can actually add a title this way. So matplotlib.pyplot as PLT. PLT is the plot figure, and you can actually make changes to the figure by calling PLT. So we're actually going to set a title, and that title is Bitcoin prices peaked in 2021, keeping it simple. And then you can call plt.show to show the plot. If you don't assign a value here, if you just call rolling.plot, the plot shows by default. But if you assign the result to a variable, then you can actually modify the plot before you show it. So let's run this, and hey, we got our title. So we have the same plot as before, but now we have a title added to it. And we've taken a little bit more manual control, and now we know how to modify the plot on our own. So the next modification we will make will be a little bit more extensive, and that'll be to clean up this x-axis. So we want to get rid of date, and we want to make these labels look nicer. They're just really hard to read right now. So in order to do that, we'll create a matplotlib figure ourselves. And that figure is basically the drawing canvas. And then we can modify that canvas by drawing things onto it. And instead of calling the pandas plot method, we're instead going to call the matplotlib plot method and pass in our own values. So we're going to pass in the x-axis value, which is the index. The index is just the dates, so that's what goes on the x-axis. And then we're going to pass in the y-axis, and that's the price. And what we can also set is the line width, just how thick we want the line on the chart to be. So we're going to set the line width to 4. So let's go ahead and just see what this looks like before we do anything else. This is going to take a while to run because it's currently trying to add every single date on the x-axis label, which is eating a lot of processor time. So let's actually also assign ticks and tick labels. So what this lets you do is instead of labeling every single point on the axis, it lets you specify a few points where you want labels. And we want labels at the beginning of 2015, basically at the beginning of every year. So we're basically gonna tell matplotlib, hey, only put a label on the x-axis at the beginning of each year. So we'll do ticks, and then we'll do tick labels. So we don't actually want to see 2015-01-01 on the axis. Instead, we just want to see 2015. So we'll actually use that as a tick label. All right, so what we can do is we can do plt.xticks, ticks, and then we want this to be vertical, so it's easier to read. So we can go ahead and do that. And then we'll set the tick labels as well. All right. So we can see now that we have cleaned up these labels quite a bit. So if I didn't set the tick labels, we would have ended up with the full date on the x-axis. And we just don't need that 0101. It just adds a lot of visual clutter for no reason. So that's why we're setting these tick labels. So again, I know that was a lot of code, so just to go through it really slowly. First, we created our plot. Now we want to make some modifications and fix up that x-axis. So we basically created these ticks where we want the axis to be labeled. We identified what we want the ticks to be labeled with. You could change this to anything. If you wanted to make that A, you could, but we'll make it 2015 because A doesn't make any sense. And we also told matplotlib to use these ticks and these tick labels. So let's go ahead and show that. And hey, we now have these tick labels on January 1st of every year. The one thing we are missing is our title, and we can just add that back in. And let me just copy and paste so you don't have to watch me type this whole title out. And yeah, now we have the same plot with our title. All right, so we cleaned up the axis, the x-axis from before, and you'll notice that we also removed the legend. So by taking a little bit more manual control and plotting it ourselves, pandas didn't automatically create this legend and didn't automatically create this date label at the bottom. So we've removed some of the stuff we didn't need just by taking a little bit more manual control here. All right, so now we're drawing everything entirely through matplotlib. We're creating a plot figure, we're creating the plot, and then we're setting up the x-axis all inside matplotlib. We're not using that pandas plot method anymore. Okay, we've done quite a lot. Just take a little breath here, shake it out. But yeah, we've come from this very basic chart to a much, much nicer looking one that looks like this. And now what we can do is we can actually go ahead and really tell our story. As I mentioned, the story we want to tell is about how Bitcoin prices peaked in 2021. And we're just going to make it a little bit easier for the viewer to actually see what that story is. So we'll actually be drawing two separate lines. So the first line we're going to draw is our pre-21 line. So this is all of our rows up to the start of 2021. And then we have our post-2021 line, which is everything 2021 and after, as you may have expected from post-2021. We're again going to initialize our plotting figure, but the way we're going to do the plots is slightly different. So I'm gonna just copy the plot code from before. This is the same plot code we had before. But we're going to make two lines. I mentioned the first line we're going to draw is the pre-2021 line. And we're going to make the line width a little bit smaller here. And then we're going to draw our post-2021 line. And we'll make the line width a bit thicker. And we'll also make this red. So it's just really obvious to the viewer, hey, the prices did increase post-2021. All right, and then we again have to set up our ticks in the title, but I'll copy and paste that code so you don't have to watch me type it again. And hey, that's cool. Now we have the same plot, except the 2021 bit is highlighted in red, so the viewer can really see the story you're trying to tell. Now we'll do one more thing to really tell that story effectively, and that is adding something called AXV span. So let me show you what that is. So this basically highlights the background of the graph in a certain range. And we are going to highlight it within 2021. So how do we know what the range is that we want to set? So it's based on the number of data points we're graphing. So if we look at the shape of this pre-2021 data frame, we can see that it has 2,192 rows. And if you look at this graph, we have 2,192 data points before 2021. So we want to start our highlighting at that point. And then we want to end our highlighting at that point plus whatever the length of 2021 data is. So we can see we have 361 rows for 2021. So we're going to highlight those 361 rows that constitute 2021. There's also a couple other parameters we'll set here. Alpha is just how much we want to shade, and then color is the color we want to shade it. So let's do that and see what happens. So you can see this is now highlighted in the background of the graph 2021. So a viewer's eye is immediately drawn to look at, okay, this is where the story is, this is what I want someone to look at. All right, so we've come really far here. We've come from a really basic graph to this graph that looks a lot nicer, tells our story more cleanly. Now, there's a lot more you could do if you want to continue working and continue learning here. You could cut off some of this data to really tell the story that Bitcoin peaked in 2021. You don't necessarily need some of this earlier data from 2015, 2016, 2017. So you could try to cut that data off. You might also think about highlighting maybe a little more broadly. Maybe you want to highlight everything that increased during the pandemic. There's also improvements you could make to the graph itself. You could try to remove these grid lines or make the grid lines look nicer. You could also think about changing the colors and the style and making that look nicer as well. You could also think about adding labels for the axes or just a more descriptive title and a subtitle. So we've come really far here. We've downloaded data, we've converted it from a dictionary into a pandas data frame, and we've made a nice visualization of that data. And along the way, we've learned more about pandas and matplotlib. But there's a lot more you could do if you want to, and I covered some of the next steps. Well, it was really fun talking through this with you. I hope you enjoy it, and if you have any questions or you want to leave any feedback, please write a comment. I'd love to hear it, and I'd love to chat with you. I'd also love to hear if you made any modifications to this and you want to share your work. That would be great. All right, thank you.